Prologue. He watched these events unfold, keenly interested and admittedly surprised. First was the amazing fact that a mere human had deciphered the means and able to get one of their ships to automatically return here. But even more exciting, he had never seen a mortal living human before. Xirxe's behavior was more or less as he had expected. The man was handsome. She was beautiful. They all were, he thought. So their attraction was almost a foregone conclusion. He could wonder and speculate later. At present, he needed to decide how to proceed. The creator had been gone for a reasonably long amount of time. In fact, all three of them had, and the fact that one of their ships had been pilfered by a human led him to believe that all the creators could very well be deactivated or dead, to use the organic term. The actions of Steven and Xirxe had activated Cerberus, as was the contingent, but in his mind the question was, should he simply sit back and watch these events play out? Cerberus would catch and destroy them both, and that was a certainty. Or perhaps, should he pursue a different path? The creators were gone, the hive and all of society in utter turmoil. Could this possibly present an opportunity? Could these events bring forward what he had always hoped? These two entities clearly loved one another, and Xirxe sought the transformation. He decided that for now he would watch and weigh possibilities and options. But yes, could be, these are the events he has been waiting for the last 3,500 years. Perhaps. Xirxe and Steven had barely made it out of the city. The going had been easy at first, with all the city residents quarantined to their homes, when the alarm sounded. It got considerably more difficult when the streets became flooded with what Xirxe referred to as hive enforcement, a fancy word for police, Steven thought. What unnerved him, however, was when the alarms had ceased and the hive enforcement had vanished. He wasn't sure what was going on. When he asked Xirxe to explain, she whispered one word: Cerberus. He could tell that for the first time since they met, she was completely terrified. With all means of public transportation deactivated, they had to continue on foot, and often in a dead run. Steven had no idea how big this city was, but it took them nearly 2 days for the metropolis to fall away to a vast desert. They had no weapons, food, or water, yet they kept running. Finally, when dusk approached, Xirxe finally slowed to a walk. She had just remembered that Steven was an organic creature and would need to rest. So she decided to stop until morning. Scanning the surrounding area, she located a spring of water just underground, close by, and led Steven to it so he could drink. Soon, he fell asleep in her arms. Xirxe, however, did not sleep. She spent that night scanning as far as she could for anything. Cerberus, a possible food source, or more importantly, the technician. The trouble was, she had absolutely no idea what she should be even looking for. She stopped at the last gate that ran between the wastelands and the city. They definitely had gone this way. Naturally, there was nowhere else to run to. However, her thermal imaging showed nothing, and there were no visible tracks. This was due to the fact that wind and atmospheric conditions on Abraxxus could change the landscape in a minute, erasing any and all traces. One target was organic, and she knew it would need water and rest at the very least. So she opted to close the distance and walked forward in a straight path. At sunrise, she would stop and perform a seismic scan at dawn to detect their movement and gain their direction. He watched intently as Xirxe shook her companion Steven awake. He was marveled and fascinated as the two kissed deeply, taking note on his monitor of the profound effect the action had on Xirxe's systems. He also detected that 2 miles south of them was Cerberus, no doubt setting up to perform a seismic scan. And at that distance, once she had them detected, by day's end, they would both be dead. Therefore, it was decided. For the first time in 3,500 years, he accessed systems he had designed and sent a homing beacon to Xirxe's visual interface, along with one word: follow. Xirxe was startled by the word that sounded over and over in her head. She wondered, was it a malfunction? In her visions, she saw a bright blue blinking dot on the horizon, followed again by the word. Then flashed a message: Cerberus, 2 miles south, seismic scan, move fast, move now. Pulling Steven to his feet, she urged him. Run. What? Why? He protested. She only smiled and looked at him. The technician, she said, and they began to run. As she had planned, she detected them about 2 miles north of her, and began to walk in that direction. There was no hurry. They couldn't go anywhere. However, she was confused as to why she could not access Xirxe via the Hive collective network. Perhaps a malfunction, or she might have possibly disconnected herself. Besides, she was enjoying herself. This was a real mission, not some mundane training exercise that once completed would only find her back in stasis, in the nothing. After several hours, the desert began to open up into forest land, and likewise Xirxe began to slow down. A little ways inside the tree line was a large hill that overlooked the vast desert beyond. "We will rest there," she said to Steven, and they made their way to the top of the hill. About that time, a new message reached Xirxe. "Stop. Rest. No movement. No sound." After locating some edible flowers and fruit, the two sat looking out into the desert. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, they saw a small figure out in the sands, making its way straight for them. Xirxe's message now read, Cerberus, your location. Do not move. No sound. That's Cerberus, she said. Don't move. The figure proceeded and came within 50 yards of the tree line, and then simply stopped. Steven saw a beautiful raven-haired woman, and with recognition a soft gasp escaped him when he realized who it was he was looking at. It's Mina Harker, he whispered. They were close, very close. If they had went forward into the woodlands, it would be much harder to track them. Her thermal scan showed minute traces, but that could very likely be animals. She would stop here for the night. If they were still in the desert, she would detect them at first light. If they were ahead in the forest, she would detect their movement easy enough. They could not have made it very far in only a few hours. They were not very far from him, barely 5 miles. The device he carried would mask him completely from Cerberus, and he carried 2 more with him. The night was bright, as both the moons were full, and as he crested the hill, he could clearly see Steven and Xirxe, and beyond them, moonlight gleaming off her black hair, was Cerberus. He sent one last message to Xirxe on her network. Behind you am here. No noise will come to you, warn organic. Silently he crawled up behind them. He activated and handed each of them one of the devices. Keep low and follow me. With these, she is blind to you for the moment. The 3 silently descended the hill and made their way east through the forest to his encampment. However, Cerberus detected an ever slight change in temperature from atop the hill in front of her. Abraxxus, she thought, what are you doing? Now I shall have to destroy you as well. You never should have interfered. There was no need for further scans. She knew precisely where they were headed. This had become a sad venture indeed, for now she must destroy not only one of her world's most legendary citizens, but also the one most loved by the Creator. However, the law is the law, no exceptions. The 3 arrived in a large dwelling, seemingly built within and upon the ground at the same time. Inside, it was much larger than it appeared outside. The main room was dominated by electronic equipment and dozens of workstations, all manned by assorted mechanical beings. To Steven, these looked like robots. They were nowhere near the sophistication of Xirxe and her kind. Before you begin, he said to them, I know why you have sought me out. Xirxe, you desire me to modify your body, so you can be a lover to this man, have him as lover to you. Is this correct? Yes, she said, with tears in her eyes. Very much so. Turning to Steven, and you, human, is this your wish as well? I warn you, answer truthfully. This union will be far deeper and lasting than any organic mortal could ever conceive of. Steven looked at him darkly. I have lost my world, my family, my children. I will not, I cannot lose her. Understood. But Steven, you must also realize, as must Xirxe, that you are mortal. She is not. And someday, Xirxe, this man will die. Then I will choose to die with him. Deny me if you wish, but I will simply go out and seek CERBERUS myself. I have no desire to be without him. At this, the technician was quiet for a long time. He then said, I will agree, provided the two of you will grant me a service. He continued, I believe the creators are dead, and thus I believe it is time for our kind to evolve. I ask that the two of you will remain after the process and aid me in implementing the changes needed to make this occur. A revolution, Steven said. Yes, said the technician. Love without feeling, without touch, is an unimaginable and sadistic cruelty, Xirxe said. I agree, as does my beloved. Very well, the technician said. Allow me a few moments to make ready, and we will begin. Standing a ways from the encampment, Cerberus had heard the entire conversation. So she thought, she means to sexually modify her body. For a human, she thought the notion was ridiculous. However, she decided to wait until the technician had Xirxe incapacitated in the lab and in stasis. Then she would storm in and end this. She slowly made her way down to the house. Before we begin, the technician said, I feel I owe you the truth of this world, the reason for this revolution, as you put it, Steven. As you probably know, I was the first creation after the Creator arrived in this world, and I loved him. He loved me. We were devoted to this world, to our vision of what it could become. But Adam Frankenstein was also a dark man, a paranoid man, and eventually a perverse man. At first, we sought to create a world of immortals, free of war, violence, sickness, hunger, paradise. My designs to modify our forms, the process to conceive, was to be the final step in our evolution. But shortly after the birth of Enki, Adam had determined that the boy was not in fact his son. He fell into a rage and spent more and more time here rather than at home with Mina and Enki. He ultimately decided to not allow our kind to undergo the final conversions, yet he opted to curse us to retain all the desire and longing, without the ability to act on it. We argued and fought about this constantly. In desperation and hopes of changing his mind by example, I made the modifications to myself and to my mate, B. His response was to banish me and destroy my beloved B. I have never forgiven him the sorrow he threw upon me that day. Oddly enough, my last project with him was the creation of CERBERUS. He insisted that she be made to look as Mina, and also that she be made with my conversion methods. Mina never suspected, but I became convinced at that point that this perverted evil man that I once so loved was now only interested in being a god over immortal slaves, while at his side a compliant, willing doppelganger of the woman he claimed to love, one that could never deceive or refuse him. I learned later from his personal logs recorded after he and Mina went after Enki, that his true mission was to kill Mina and Enki while they were after the boy and off planet. From my research and analysis, it was clear to me he never truly realized how incredibly powerful Mina and her son were. Adam was or is devoted to Mina, Steven protested. Possibly, at one time, said the technician. Perhaps this entity you mentioned called Damocles played some role in his turn of personality. It remains unknown, but now we move to the future, he said. Walking down a hallway, he opened another door to yet another room of equipment. Now, Xirxe, remove your clothing and lie upon the table. We shall now begin. Removing various patches of her skin, the technician connected Xirxe to an assorted number of machines. Xirxe, he said, we are ready to begin. I will begin to cycle you down into stasis. Steven walked up to her and kissed her. I'll be right here. I love you, Xirxe. As I do you, she said. She felt her system shutting down, her vision growing dim. Then suddenly she became aware of some being crashing through the lab door, seeing Steven being impaled by a long object, torn apart, his body coming apart in pieces. The last thing her vision saw was Mina, one of her beloved creators, tearing her own body apart. No, not Mina. Cerberus. I was so close, she thought. So close. Then nothing but blackness. No pain. Just blackness. She saw the tiniest point of light. As it seemed to grow, she could sense that she was breathing. She was aware of temperature on her skin. Now all she could see was the light. There was sound, banks of machines running, computing. She heard a soft voice. Lie still. Allow your systems to completely come into alignment. It was a technician. At the same time, she was crushed by the devastation. She had seen Cerberus tear Steven apart. He was dead. Why wasn't she also? All at once, her vision came back fully. She was naked, but different. She looked as a human woman. Breasts, pubic hair, no panel seams on her body. Xirxe. She heard Steven's voice. Quickly she sat upright, long raven black hair cascading over her face. Still disoriented, she looked over. There stood Steven. Please, Steven, come back and lie down so I can finish. She will be fine, said the technician. As he walked back to the table, she noticed that the entire lower half of his body was now made of glistening titanium. After a few moments, the technician came to her and said, I'm sorry, I wasn't fast enough to save your body, as he gently wrapped a blanket over her shoulders. I truly hope you will both find my solution acceptable, he said. Walking back to Steven, he began to finish applying the cybernetic skin to his new body. Xirxe stood, and for the first time she saw her reflection in the glass wall of the lab. It was Mina Harker's face that stared back at her. Her face. The one individual able to deactivate Cerberus was the very one who created her in the first place. However, she had moved so fast by the time Abraxxus entered the deactivation code into her system, she had destroyed both Xirxe and Steven. He had managed to keep Steven alive long enough to digitize and retain his consciousness. Xirxe, at the moment of her destruction, had just slipped into stasis, so Cerberus essentially destroyed an empty shell in her case. In the case of Xirxe, the solution was a simple one, to give her the form belonging to Cerberus. Then it became a simple matter of constructing a new form for Steven that bore his likeness. Eventually, with their help, the technician, now once again known as Abraxxus, did indeed allow the people of that world to evolve. Abraxxus created the world that he and his beloved creator had always dreamed of before the darkness and madness, and thanks to Steven and Xirxe, their world found inspiration in something it had never known before: children. At some point, all data and memory of Mina, Enki, and Adam faded, vanished. Likewise, too, all reference to humanity and Earth did as well. It was as if the universe was wiped clean, yet this one perfect jewel in space was allowed to remain untouched. And so Abraxxus flourished, until 5 billion years later, Steven and Xirxe embraced, as its sun consumed it and burned it to ash, albeit to start the great cycle again and again for eternity.